listen-only mode.
Welcome to Gestalt's webinar, How to Profit from the new HIPAA-HITECH Act of 2009. Today's presenter is Jim Hare, VP of Worldwide Sales, Gestalt Technologies, Inc., USA. Jim has over 25 years of sales management experience in the emerging high-technology marketplace. Jim has spent the last 10 years building successful MSPs across the globe. With many of his MSP partners reaching over $10 million in recurring revenue sales, Jim is an expert in helping channel partners expand into new, high-margin, recurring revenue lines of business. Jim is also a well-recognized thought leader in software as a service and cloud computing. If you have any questions, please send them via the questions function in GoToWebinar, and we will address them at the end of the session. If you would like a copy of the presentation, please send an email directly to Jim. His contact information will be given at the end. Thank you, Jim, for presenting, and I'll turn the webinar over to you now.
Okay, terrific. Michael, thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for attending. The session today is about how the new high-tech changes around HIPAA present an opportunity for channel partners to get into this market. It's a new market that, although compliance has been around a long time, there really hasn't been a huge push in the healthcare environment to be HIPAA compliant. And we're going to talk a lot about why that's true and why now is a good opportunity to get into that space if you haven't been in it before. So from an agenda standpoint, we're going to talk about what's changed. HIPAA has been around for 13, 14 years. Why now? What's changed? And what's so hard about this? What's the big deal? Why is this such a difficult thing to try to get into compliance? And talk about HIPAA itself and some other areas. And then very briefly about technology that we produce called SecureGRC that can enable you to get into this space. And then what does a managed compliance service look like? And last, we'll talk about single practitioners and where do they fit into this problem. So at a high level, let's look at compliance just from a generic standpoint. If you look at it as a component of security, today security is made up of a couple of different areas. One is the physical area. As IT providers, you're very familiar with this. It's firewalls and IDSs and virus scanning and vulnerability scanning and all of that stuff. I mean, those are the physical things that you kind of identify with security. But there's also the policies or the rules. In order to keep all of this infrastructure up and running properly, you need to have some guidelines or policies or rules that help you to keep this security infrastructure operational and secure. And what compliance is really the validation that you're following those rules. Forget the regulatory aspect of it for a moment. In order to make sure and to validate and to document your proof that you're following these rules, that's really what compliance is. The documentation piece is really the regulatory requirement. But just from best practices, in order to keep a client secure, you really need to have all three of these aspects. So even if there wasn't a regulatory requirement, it's still good business practice and security practice to have compliance and to follow a compliance program. So what's changed? Well, fundamentally in healthcare, what's happening is a lot of information is moving to electronic and has been moving for the last several years. Images, X-rays, CAT scans, PET scans used to be film, now electronic. The big push in electronic medical records, so patient information is being transferred electronically. As more and more content is moved to the electronic environment, the risk of losing client data or having a data breach goes up significantly. Before, if it was a physical file, yes, somebody could steal a file and it was not a good thing, but they weren't stealing tens of thousands of records in one shot. Whereas electronic medical records, that's an easy thing to do. A USB can hold tens of thousands of customer data files. So as they go electronic, it increases the risk, and certainly the regulatory agencies have recognized that and have taken steps to try to help healthcare providers to protect their customer data. If they don't, they will penalize them, and that's kind of where HIPAA and HITECH come in. It's a combination of carrot and stick of saying, hey, you should move to electronic data. At the same time, if you don't protect your data even more stringently, we're going to beat you up even more. So they've increased a lot of penalties. They've added some very serious fines, as well as the potential for criminal prosecution. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. But probably the most important aspect of why this is important today is enforcement. If you go back a couple of years and talk to a large hospital or anybody in the healthcare business, they certainly were concerned about HIPAA, but it probably didn't even make their top 10 concerns moving forward. But as enforcement has now taken center stage, where a number of organizations can enforce HIPAA compliancy, as well as they get to keep the fines, you're going to see that HIPAA is going to move rapidly up into the top 3 areas that healthcare providers will be concerned about. And probably the biggest one, personally, I think, is they really empowered the state's attorney generals to prosecute, of which, the first one happened just in July, that the Connecticut Attorney General won a case and settlement of $250,000 against a Connecticut hospital. And the key aspect is they get to keep a large portion of these fines. So between the increase in fines and the ability to keep a percentage of those fines, you're getting some very aggressive organizations going out and prosecuting. So why is this so hard? I mean, why is compliance complicated? Well, first of all, the regulations themselves can be very vague and very complicated and quite numerous. So there's just a lot of work to do. And it's really not something in the past that's lended itself to automation. It's really been a very manual process, needing to look at your security infrastructure, your asset infrastructure, your IT operations, policies, procedures. It involves a lot of people. So it's in general been a very manually intensive and something that's highly prone to error, since it is manual. And the products that are out there today, and there are quite a few products out there today, are really designed for Fortune 1000 enterprise-class technologies. They're still very manual. They typically require a significant amount of consulting and technical expertise to deploy and get functional. The solutions out there in general are really not very adequate for today's environment, especially in the small and medium businesses. Still very expensive. Typically, your enterprise deploy. They require hardware and software. They require implementation costs, and they require significant training, and just in general, it's been a very, very expensive proposition. Hence, that's why a lot of companies are still doing it with 3 reminders and spreadsheets. But it is a very expensive proposition. Today, there's studies that say it costs small hospitals and small health organizations thousands of dollars, larger ones millions of dollars, to kind of establish where they are from a compliance standpoint. And this really isn't even dealing with the remediation or the repairs of the problems or gaps that are found when you go out and do an assessment or some form of an audit. So what are the advantages of implementing compliance software, compliance automation software? Well, certainly cost, right? The first thing it does is it pulls out a lot of the labor, which is a direct cost for the service provider such as yourself or for the end user, as well. It basically gives you visibility across the infrastructure and across the various compliance sections, whereas, if you have just a document or a report that you've done manually, it's hard to kind of get a view of what's going on from a centralized repository. So having some form of an IT dashboard with some kind of real-time or near real-time type of displays is really important going forward. We're a firm believer that audits and assessments, although better than doing nothing, are not sufficient. You really need a continuous type of service, and that's where IT dashboards kind of come in. And you also move from a reactive to a proactive environment. As your infrastructure changes, as policies change, as personnel come and go, new applications get deployed, upgrades. Everybody's environment, even a single practitioner, can be relatively dynamic. Unless you've got some kind of continuous type of monitoring, your compliance can be, completely misaligned very quickly within days of an audit, weeks of an audit. So it's unrealistic to go into the environment with just an audit mentality. Although, again, better than nothing, and from a cost perspective, maybe that's the only thing the organization can afford. But it's really the continuous process of compliance is critical. Having rules about how you upgrade and maintain your firewall are great, but if you only follow those rules once a year, you're going to get into trouble. And of course, the whole objective here is to reduce risk. And risk is not just financial risk. There's all kinds of regulatory, criminal, civil, as well as public, exposure, litigation. Risk has a number of different facets. So the idea of putting in technology that gives you a view of your risk as a whole entity is a critical aspect of any technology you want to implement. Today, most people are using manual efforts, and that's typically using Excel spreadsheets or 3-ring binders and Word documents. And there are a number of significant problems that these face, and auditors really don't like it for these reasons. It's certainly difficult to show a lot of people what's going on with a high-level view. Spreadsheets don't lend themselves. You kind of have to do manual analysis and go in and look at all of the documents and try to make heads or tails on what the documents are telling you. There's no analytics built in. There's no summary type data. So there's no linkage of a particular aspect that's potentially, say, is non-compliant, and what does that mean for risk? Is being non-compliant doesn't mean that you have tremendous risk. It may mean minimal risk, or it could be significant risk. So there's really no linkage between what's on a spreadsheet versus the relative risk profile. You also really have no methodology to go from period to period. So whether it's annual or quarterly or monthly, it's hard to compare where you were to where you are today. Again, the inherent nature is not an analytic tool. It's really just a display tool for all intents and purposes, and a tracking tool. So there's no methodology to compare yourself. And auditors certainly are looking for improvement. If you ever get audited or have a data breach, they're looking, are you making progress? Have you been improving your environment? And by the very nature, compliance is a collaborative effort. There are multiple people within an organization typically required to respond to assessments or questionnaires that are out there, and it requires IT and human resources and operations all to kind of be in sync. Spreadsheets typically are not very collaborative, and of course there is typically no security at all. Anybody can go in and accidentally delete data. There's no validation. There's no auditing capability within it. So spreadsheets typically are something that auditors don't like because of their complete lack of audit. And again, record retention is critical. As things happen in the environment and things change, you want the ability to go back and see where you were. You can certainly save revisions and copies of spreadsheets, but you end up with hundreds and hundreds of documents that are just very difficult to manage and identify. So in general, spreadsheets are just not a good thing from a security standpoint, and of course they really aren't cheaper. At the end of the day, they're going to require a significant amount of labor to keep them operational and functional. So there's really not even any cost savings in doing it. Let's talk quickly about HIPAA. So HIPAA kind of started as a bill under President Clinton, and the idea behind HIPAA was to help people to be able to keep their insurance if they lost their job. Hence the portability concept, the portability verbiage in the HIPAA acronym itself. So the idea is that if you left your job, you could keep your insurance, and that's really where COBRA came in. So originally HIPAA was kind of, hey, how can I keep my insurance if I lose my job? And then, of course, it morphed into a number of other areas, as any bill in Congress will. Everybody throws in their 2 cents. And the things that we're most interested in really are how they define the privacy and security aspects of a particular business. And then what happened and what really spurred this type of environment to be something that the channel can really get involved in is the HIPAA Act, which was ratified in 2009, but really came into effect February of 2010. So just recently, and it did a number of things. It had some advantages. under the ARRA Act, there was incentives to have organizations move to electronic medical records, but at the same time it also imposed some significant penalties and increased the profile. And also there is a security breach notification that if you lose customer data, if you lose patient data, either through employee theft or a data breach, you have a certain amount of time, 60 days, to notify the proper authorities. And there are levels. It's over 500 patient records, as an example. And if you don't fulfill that obligation, you could be held criminally liable as well as civilly liable. So it's pretty nasty. So a couple of key areas that have changed that really kind of drive these requirements is the fine went from a maximum of $25,000 per incident up to $1.5 million. So a substantial increase. You know, not that they would do this intentionally, but, you know, a hospital or a small clinic might decide, you know, the odds of me getting audited are slim to none, and even if I do get hit, you know, the fine's only 25 grand. Maybe it's not worth really investing the time and effort to try to look into HIPAA compliancy. But now it's aggressive. So now it's 1.5 million, and that's on a particular incident or similar incident. You could have multiple incidents, and the fines can go up dramatically. They've also moved the enforcement agency from sort of an obscure organization under Medicare and Medicaid without really auditors or funding or really the aggressive nature to the Office of Civil Rights, both well-funded, very aggressive in their pursuit for litigation, as well as a key component is, and this is true for the Attorney Generals, is they get to keep a lot of the money that they recover. So they become sort of self-funded. The last that I heard is they have hired over 1,200 auditors since February. So in a very short amount of time, they're putting some serious teeth behind this. And again, the one that I think is going to drive a lot of this is the state attorney generals can file HIPAA enforcement actions. And again, they get to keep a large portion of the fines they levy. So they are going to be, this is a huge potential revenue source for the states. Another key area is there was a provision that if you didn't know, it was sort of an excuse, a legitimate excuse, and many organizations use that. But they've specifically taken that out under HITECH. So whether you audit yourself or don't audit yourself or do nothing or regardless of it, it doesn't matter whether you know or didn't know that the level of fines and penalties and civil or criminal actions will be the same. So they took out a very important clause that a lot of organizations hid behind. And HITECH has added some very aggressive new criminal liabilities, especially around notification of a breach. So in the past, it was kind of vague about exactly what would happen if you had a breach and you sort of fixed the breach, but you didn't take specific action. Now you have to notify the press. You have to notify the state agencies, the federal agencies, as well as the patients who potentially have had data loss. If you don't do that in a reasonable time, then you can be held criminally liable. So let's talk a little bit about who is concerned. Who would this benefit? Well, today it's pretty much anybody in the healthcare business. It could be a single practitioner, meaning a doctor, a dentist, a chiropractor. It could be a large medical facility with multiple hospitals. A key aspect of HITECH is they added something called the business associate, which we're going to talk a little bit about in the future. The hospital or the actual healthcare provider is called the covered entity. You'll hear that frequently when you go and learn about this technology. But the covered entity is the healthcare provider, and the people they deal with are business associates. First, they need to have a written contract between themselves and the business associate. And the business associate is held to similar standards as far as compliancy. So that means if you are a service provider, your company provides services to someone in the healthcare facility, healthcare business, and you potentially have access to patient information. So if you're an IT guy and you're on site and you can log into their network, you clearly have the ability to get access. It doesn't necessarily say you have to actually have access. It's really whether you have the ability to have access. And if you do, and most IT guys do, they help with backup, they help with security and network, you will fall under HIPAA compliance as well. So if you think about the ripple effect, that means the online pharmacies, if I use online radiology for my imaging, any services, if I'm using a web-based service, if there is patient information involved, then everybody in the food chain must be HIPAA compliant, and there must be written contractual documentation between the entities. This is going to present a real challenge and nightmare, and there are literally over 5 million opportunities here. That's how many, the estimates for taking a combination of covered entities or the healthcare providers as well as the business associates. So it's a huge opportunity. In the larger organizations, there's going to be, a typical hierarchical business structure. So you really want to start with a C-level type person. But under any covered entity, there has to be assigned a privacy or communication or compliance officer. If it's a single practitioner, it could be the doctor. So that's really who you want to start with. Who is ultimately responsible? Who ends up in the orange jumpsuit if there's a criminal charge against the organization? And again, realistically, unless there's true malicious intent, the criminal aspect of it is not, you're not going to see a lot of, heart surgeons being hauled off to jail. But however, there is a threat there. It's really going to be around civil type fines. So how do you address this market? We've come out with a new technology we call SecureGRC. It's a cloud-based software as a service delivered compliance automation solution. So it allows channel partners for the first time to deliver a purpose-built tool specifically designed to help automate a lot of this IT and assessment type information required. We sort of have two sizes. We have the typical hospital, clinic, multi-doctor office type product that's got a lot of horsepower, does a lot of things, and then we've got single practitioner, which is a very basic web-driven type technology. I'll talk about that at the end. And we deliver it exclusively through the channel. So we have what we call managed compliance provider partners who take our technology and deliver it as a service to the end user, whether that be a one-time type audit or the preferred method, which is a continuous recurring revenue type opportunity. The product itself is very robust. It's got a number of advanced capabilities and modules depending on the type of compliance framework that you deploy. It's all one price except for incremental compliance framework. So the standard product comes with one framework, say HIPAA. But if you have a facility that also, say, takes credit cards, you'd need PCI. That would be a plug-in incremental cost. But it's all one product. It's all menu-driven. It's a very easy product to use and deploy, and it has incredible advanced capability. One of my channel partners, Digital Boundary Groups, was doing a session with their consortium called One End Service, and One End Service had asked John why they should allow SecureGRC to present at this in this community, and this was his response to them, in which he allowed me to copy. And I just like the statement of very expensive and loathed and not very effective environment, and I think that's true today. Is that this is a very complex environment, and people just hate it. The end users just hate regulatory compliance in general. So we are a service similar to a Salesforce.com. We're a subscription-based model, so there's no hardware, there's no software, there's no agents. Backup and disaster recovery is all built into the product. All the maintenance is built in, so it's pretty much a flat rate cost. All the content is managed by us, so as HIPAA regulations change or new versions come out, all that back-end stuff is all, pre-built into the product. And this is something that deploys rapidly. You can deploy this in a couple of hours and get value and show value to your client very quickly. From the standpoint of why be in this business, those of you who are in the managed services business clearly recognize that when you build a managed service business, you have high margin recurring sales, and the most important part, at least from what I've seen with my partners, is the add-on business. In the managed services business, if you're managing a server and you recommend based on performance data that the server is going to run out of capacity in a couple of months and the client should upgrade or buy a new one, they have the option of saying, well, we can live with the slower performance. But in the compliance business, if you show them a report and say these things have to be repaired in order to be compliant, they are mandated by law to do it. Now, they may not necessarily use you, but who's in the best position at that point to upsell some additional products and services to help them get compliant, and then rerun the analysis to prove now that the new technology pushes them into compliance. It is a ground floor opportunity. There's pros and cons to that, of course, but this is not a crowded market, at least from the standpoint of managed compliance. There are a number of PCI auditors out there. HIPAA auditors are fairly new because nobody cared about it in the past. But I think you're going to see this as a really rapid growth business. This is something that's going to get great publicity for us, at least from the standpoint of having market forces drive the requirements. And again, I talked to you about the perfect storm of market dynamics, the increase in fines and penalties and criminal penalties, as well as the enforcement and, of course, the enablement of the tool itself. It is a must-have. It's not a nice-to-have. So this is a great opportunity for the channel to really come in and provide high-value, high-margin services to your clients. So why partner with us? There are other products out there, and you can do your research. If you go up to Google and look around, you'll find products. But what you're going to find is that all of our competitors sell the bulk of their business direct. We sell zero direct. We're 100% channel-focused. We're subscription-based, so you don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a platform. You can subscribe based on usage. We don't require any upfront. There's no payment to get into the program, so there's no upfront capital investment other than your first subscription for the product. We also have an outstanding partner portal, of which we've got the key thing is the cookbook, which tells you everything that you need to know to get started in this business, how to package, how to price, how to develop, go-to-market strategies, pricing, contracts, and all of those things. We also have a library of policies that you can give to your clients, for their usage. We've got great customer deliverables. The product has a terrific dashboard that you can or cannot expose your client to depending on what you're doing. So if you're delivering a managed service, you can give them a couple of key sets of graphics that shows them their compliance status in near real time, and then a complete set of reports and a report writer. So whether you're an auditor coming in, and we have an auditor portal to present the data in a format that they're expecting, or whether you're giving your customers gap analysis reports, or you're using it internally to remediate problems, there's lots of advanced capability in the product that makes it a nice set of deliverables for your customers. So let's talk about how do you make money. There's really kind of two ways, audits or assessments we talked about, or the preferred method, which is the ongoing use of the software in the form of a managed service. And regardless of whether you do one or two, the third one is really where the big money is, or potentially the big money is. So what is an audit? An audit or assessments are typically one-off reviews of the compliance status or the readiness. So you go in and you basically do an analysis of the customer's environment, and then our software maps that to the standard compliance framework and presents a gap report that tells you what is non-compliant. So basically at that point, you and or the client need to fix these problems in order to be compliant. So you guys as a service would fix these problems, which are usually IT related. It could be some policy related stuff. Once you've gone through this process, you want to take sort of another snapshot to compare where you were once you've implemented a new firewall or upgraded the firewall or whatever is required to be compliant. These are the things that you do as an IT service provider every day. You now have the ability to kind of compare where you were when you started and where you are now. And the whole idea is hopefully that you leave the tool behind and continue this as a service, so there's not there's not this panic mode of, oh my goodness, we don't know where we are, and you run this gap analysis and it takes you all this time to fix it. It turns it back into sort of your typical ongoing service. Another key aspect is you don't have to be an expert in the compliance law. Doesn't hurt, and there are plenty of places to educate yourself, but what you're not doing is you're not certifying. You're not saying that you are HIPAA compliant. What you're doing is identifying the areas that are non-compliant, helping the client fix them, and giving them the information that they need in order to go get or to prove compliancy. But at no time are you saying, at least for what we're suggesting, is that you are compliant. Now, there's certainly a lot of business if you want to go get educated and go get certified, and you want to be able to put your stamp and say, I certify this organization. That's outside the scope of what we recommend. We are just a tool to help you identify and remediate the problems, not necessarily to guarantee compliance, although our reports are what will be used for that proof. So again, you're not certifying. One-time assessments are better than nothing. However, the truth is, like any security policy, it's really the relentlessly, I like this term, the relentlessly assess. So you constantly, this is an ongoing basis, you constantly have to validate that you're following these policies and that you have policies in place. So, this was a quote from, some analyst about that compliance requires relentless assessment, not just a one-time snapshot. So if you talk about kind of, let's assume that we like the idea of a managed service. How do we go about building a managed service? Well, the first thing is really sit down, and this is something we help our partners is okay, what is it you want to build? What do you want to deliver out to the client? And that's where we can help you. But basically, the service is technology that will help the end user automatically detect and resolve the changes that impact compliance. And that resolution or the remediation of a particular problem is most likely labor from you. So if the system identifies that you've got a firewall that's out of compliance and, based on your expertise, you realize you can't, it's old, it can't be upgraded, you got to replace it, that's an IT level service that you provide. Our technology is the identification and the tracking and the audit trail. So when you go in and the gap is identified and we create what is basically a trouble ticket inside the system, you now have a tracking mechanism. As you remediate and close that ticket and explain how it was repaired, all that's time-stamped with the audit trails in case there is an audit or there is a data breach and you have to prove best practices. So all of these services get built, and then your typical you have to build a value proposition for the clients and the prospects. Again, we help you do all this stuff, and the value proposition is basically reduction of risk through continuous auditing. And of course, the tool gives you that centralized accountability and a central data repository for all of the documents and policies that are going to be out there as part of this solution. The problem set that you're solving is basically it reduces cost. So this maintaining an ongoing compliance stature in the long term is going to be significantly less expensive than just the audit and repair methodology. So you can prove that managed services is actually a significant cost savings over time. And you're going to automate a lot of this. That's what's going to help. So it's going to pull out a lot of manual effort that the client is currently doing or possibly not doing anything today. It changes the attitude of, panic because of a potential audit or, God forbid they have a data breach. Well, they're going to be in deep trouble. If you're doing a continuous audit service and they have a data breach, which is highly unlikely because of the compliance, but somehow, an employee steals a laptop or something that somehow they figured it out, you're going to be in a much better situation to understand the impact and immediately respond to that. And of course, it certainly reduces manual errors that are traditional in these environments. So, it's packaging, it's creating an ROI pitch, which is pretty straightforward. There's a couple of easy mechanisms to clearly identify to you, the end user, that this is actually a significant cost savings, and you can prove it fairly easily. And of course, defining the benefits is a critical component. Why am I doing this? Between documentation and providing centralized document control, evidence of security operations and tasks, all of the things required by the regulation. So going through, again, the last piece is the remediation piece. So whether it's an audit or assessment or an ongoing service, you're going to identify gaps or areas that need to be improved. And the studies have come up and said that it may cost, $10,000 for a small private practice, all the way up to multiple millions of dollars for large healthcare environments just to do the assessment. And this is not even the remediation, that the remediation is a huge cost. a potential huge cost. They said the average is $3.1 million to remediate. So a huge opportunity for IT providers today to capitalize being the inside guy. So if you're out doing the assessments or the managed services, this is a great opportunity to be in the right place at the right time in order to capitalize on the required repairs in the IT infrastructure. So again, things that when you run a gap analysis, our system does automatically, you're going to identify a number of areas within the organization. These are all IT-specific things that need to be resolved. And you may use other tools, like vulnerability scanners, patch management, web penetration, config management, so you can bring in other IT disciplines in order to enhance the view and the infrastructure knowledge that's required for compliance, and we interface with all of those technologies. So basically, we give you the ability to automate a lot of this back-end stuff, deliver a service, whether it be a very simple service, which is really kind of just deploying the tool, letting the tool do the work, or a much more of a full service where you're bundling in your labor and other tools like vulnerability scanners as an example, and providing a complete soup to nuts type of service. So you can go, very little knowledge, very low touch, reasonably good margin recurring business to a very high margin, very high touch business. It's really up to you and the resources that you have. I've got partners that do it both ways, that just kind of resell the product. They don't even change the labeling. It's not white labeled. It has our name on it. And then I've got other guys that the client doesn't even know they're using our product. They've completely encased it in their own services. We support either way. We like the business. So principally, we've been talking sort of about higher level organizations, higher sized organizations. The cutoff for the advanced product is probably 6 or 7 doctors or more in a particular practice. So clinics and small hospitals, all the way up to very, very large healthcare environments. Those require the types of advanced technologies and automation and so forth that's required by law and because of the complexities of environments. But doctors, single practitioners, dentists, chiropractors, and other areas, organizations that, really have, they have one firewall. They don't have an advanced IT infrastructure. However, they do have a significant amount of HIPAA requirements. So we have a very low-end, inexpensive, easy-to-use web-based portal that can be branded with your name on it, that doctors go in and with your assistance basically go in and do an automated assessment, which is a questionnaire. And the questionnaire is got a lot of logic built in, so depending on how they answer the question, what questions are asked next, it does require attaching of evidence, so it has a central document repository. So if they need a proof of a policy, they would attach the policy. So all of those documents are now stored in a central repository. And this is something that they would do on an ongoing basis. This is not a one-time thing. They would need to go in probably once a month for an hour, once a quarter for 2 or 3 hours, and annually maybe for a day in order to continually maintain their compliance. A key aspect of this for you as service provider are the business associates. So the web tool, the web tool is simple and inexpensive, helps them with their policies, meets the HIPAA requirements, requires almost no labor on your part other than the remediation for what's identified, but it's a huge lead generation opportunity. And there are many millions of companies that fall under either the covered entity, which is the healthcare provider itself, or the business associate. Under the HIPAA requirements in the 2 major sections, 162 and 164, they define a business associate as basically anybody that conducts all or part of a transaction on behalf of a covered entity. And that applies to your subcontractors. So you as an IT provider, if you're providing services and you have access to potentially patient information, you are a covered entity. If they're using an online, let's say they use a radiology organization and the files are online, the images are electronic, they become a business associate. If they're sending out prescriptions electronically, those pharmacies become business associates. And within the business associates, they are covered under the same requirements of HIPAA, and also if you are using subcontractors. So the key here is that on the bottom that you must have first a contract between the covered entity, the healthcare provider, the doctor, and yourselves. So there has to be a contract. And two, you have to have proof of HIPAA compliance. So you as a service provider, as an example, have to present a document to the doctor that says you're HIPAA compliant. The doctor has to have that document on file. So again, that's where our system is really great. If you think about it, it's done through a questionnaire or an assessment. So here's a sample. Here's an example. So in this assessment that the doctor has to fill out, you as a service provider would help him define all of his business associates. So maybe he has 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 business associates. So each business associate would be identified, and it would say, is this you, are you HIPAA compliant, yes or no? If they say yes, then you would have to provide proof that you're HIPAA compliant. That document would get attached into this assessment and become part of that doctor's central repository. If the answer is no, then the doctor has a certain amount of time to remediate that problem. In other words, get the document from you, or they have to, by law, terminate the relationship. Otherwise, they have exposure. And if there's a data breach, and by the way, 40% or more of all data breaches today are caused by business associates, not by employees of the covered entity themselves. So we recognize that there's a huge risk here, but this, if they don't follow this particular aspect of the law, they can be in criminal violation of HIPAA. So it becomes critical that as a business associate, you provide proof that you're HIPAA compliant and everybody else. So let's think about the opportunity here. So you go into a doctor and they fill out and they've got 8 business associates, and 4 of them have to answer no because they can't produce the document. Well, what I would do as a service provider is I'd ask the doctor, give me the names of these guys. I will go get you the certification. I would contact those 4 companies and say, hey, I'm working with Dr. Levine. He requires your HIPAA certification in order to continue doing business with you. And hopefully they're going to say, I don't know what you're talking about, or I can't produce it. It's an opportunity for you to go to them and say, well, we can help you. They now become a client. So you can now go in, help them become HIPAA compliant, again, using the same technology, the same delivery system. You now produce that HIPAA document, which you now give to the original Dr. Levine. He attaches it, Dr. Levine's happy. But the customer you just got, he's probably got, if it's a radiology group, maybe they have 500 other doctors that they work with. Well, what I would do is I would volunteer with that radiology group to say, well, you have 500 other doctors that you have to produce this document for. I'll do it for you for free, and I will deliver it for free. So that you now get 500 doctors' names. You can call them up and say, hi, I'm with Radiology Group. You need my HIPAA certification. Who do I send it to? And hopefully they'll go, what? Huh? You can say, well, we're a business associate. By law, we have to produce this, as does all your other business associates. I'm sure you're following that, correct? No? Well, maybe I can come in and help you. And on and on and on. So it's a great opportunity to network to the nth degree. So you could, within a short amount of time, be dealing with thousands of organizations that all need to be HIPAA compliant using the same exact methodology. So great opportunity here. All right, all sounds wonderful, but we all know that, what sounds great, but execution is difficult. We understand that. I've been to many, 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 many training sessions and webinars, and I leave all excited, and I get home, and I just don't know how to get started. That's where we come in. We know how to get you started. So one of the advantages of partnering with us is this get off the ground, get started, get clients, get production very quickly. And that's where we're experts at. We can really help you. So, our go-to-market strategy is very effective, and, we look forward to helping our partners grow their business. And again, I want to emphasize, the whole strategy here is you're not certifying. You're going in and you're helping identify problems, you identify policies. Now, for example, where the doctor in a single practitioner, as an example, or any healthcare provider says you have to have a policy for X and they don't have it. You can give them a policy, say, from a library. We provide a library of policies, or you can get it up on the web. It's up to the doctor to validate that that policy is correct and that's the one they want to use. You don't want to get in there and sort of customize that policy, because now you're kind of stepping over the line. You really want a HIPAA certified person. Or again, the doctor can look at the policy and say, yeah, this is acceptable. the risk is 100% up to them. So again, it's not a certification process. And I want to leave you with this last thought. Even if there wasn't a regulatory requirement for compliance, it is absolutely smart business sense to have some form of compliance. Think of it as best practices. That's what most people think of what compliance is. It's really best practices and the validation of proof you're following those best practices to keep your environment secure. So Computer World came out with this statement. It just basically says, it makes good business sense. There happens to be a regulatory requirement at the end of the day for many of these organizations. That's going to be the byproduct. The real value is keeping them secure. So if anybody would like a copy of this presentation, or if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to contact me or send me an email. I'll be happy to give you a copy of the presentation. So if anybody has sent in any questions or they want any questions, just put it into the chat window there on the webinar, and I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Great. Thanks, Jim. I'll open it up for any questions. Like Jim said, just type them in the questions area of the GoToWebinar. All right, Jim, we got our first question. How much does this cost?
Okay, great question. So on the advanced product, which has all of the IT infrastructure, automation, scanning, checking for the interaction with the vulnerability scanners, we price this at a per user basis. It's $9,100 per year. We do have short-term rentals for audits, but this is a full-blown system, and that's on a per end user basis. So typically you're looking at, again, 6, 7, 8, 9 doctors in an organization and larger. That's not really for single practitioners. For single practitioners, dentists, chiropractors, very small 1-2 man offices, we have a separate web-based product that's it's $250 per year per doctor, or per office. You can have multiple doctors with one copy of the web. So $250 for the low end, $9,100 for the high end.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Second question, what is my legal exposure?
The product itself does not have anything to do with patient data. So the product does not increase your legal exposure. As an IT provider, if you have access to the network, you have a lot of legal exposure. So our product doesn't change that profile. If you have access to potentially to client data, whether it's physical access to the site, remote access to the site, if you can get in and look at their infrastructure, you probably could get to their data. You have high exposure today. Whether you get involved with us or not, you have high exposure. You must have a business associate license with your healthcare providers, and you must be HIPAA compliant. Our product, if you didn't have any of that exposure on your own, our product would not change that. You don't have any exposure. If you just provided our service, you would not need to be HIPAA compliant. Our product provides no access to patient data. So the risk is very small. I mean, you always have risk. If you sell them a printer and it falls over and hurts somebody, you could be sued. But the reality is the exposure is little to none. Again, you're not certifying. You're not going in and saying you are HIPAA compliant. You're simply providing a service to help them identify and remediate.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jim. Next question, what is the minimum amount I can charge an end customer?
On the high end, we're typically seeing about $1,800 to a couple of thousand a month, and it goes higher as you add other services. So depending on the size of the hospital or clinic, $1,800 to $2,500, $3,000. If you're doing vulnerability, you've got labor built in. On the assessment-only side, $500 to $750 for the automated assessment technology, and then whatever labor it takes to remediate. And that could be depends on how old the infrastructure is or how problematic the infrastructure is of the single practitioner.
Great, thank you, Jim. Next question: do I need to load agents on all the devices?
Good question. No. On the high-end device, it's one piece of software sits inside the client's firewall. That one piece of software does communicate with the local infrastructure. It's looking for firewall config data, vulnerability data, non-encrypted data. and so forth. So it's one piece of software you download and put it on the client site. On the single practitioner, no, it's 100% web-based. There's no software at the doctor site.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Next question. How hard is this to deploy?
The big product deploys in about, depending on the environment, how complex, how prepared they are, from 4 hours to about a day and a half. You know, you need firewall data, you need database data. There's a number of things you need to collect, which you can do before you show up. The actual configuration of the product is, you know, we've done it in probably 2.5, 3 hours, and, you know, if everything goes well, typically nothing does. So, you know, you figure a day full install, and you run a gap report the next day. On the practitioner side, it's just assigning a login, and they're up and running.
Okay, next question. How does this apply to the skilled nursing industry, and would they be able to use the web-based product?
Yes, I mean, certainly they have access. At the end of the day, the criteria is, do you have access to patient information? If you do, you're covered. End of story. So, yeah, absolutely. You know, nurses have obviously patient information, so they are covered under HIPAA. And again, if it's you know, a small organization, the web-based assessment-only tool is probably sufficient. I think the difference really becomes infrastructure. You know, if they've got 1 or 2 firewalls, web-based only. If they've got a large infrastructure, multiple locations, firewalls, they've got Active Directory, they've got multiple applications and databases, are probably looking high-end. So that's kind of a differentiator. They all are under the same fundamental requirements. The question is how hard it is to get the data. The data is easy to get, like a small office. You don't really need all this advanced capability. But if it's hard to get, the advanced capability drives all the labor cost out.
Okay, thank you. The last question. We have a bunch of questions, Jim, but we're running out of time here, and maybe what we can do is you can answer them offline directly to the people.
Sure.
Okay, great. Last question. Can this solution be used for other compliance issues such as PCI?
Yeah, absolutely. We have all of the major frameworks. They're plug-in modules. So, for example, if it was just PCI, when you buy the base product, you'd get PCI. But let's assume that you've got a large hospital that takes credit cards. You would start with the base product, which, say, comes with HIPAA, and then add PCI framework. And we do all of the mapping. So if you've got multiple compliance frameworks, the product will automatically map the similar ones, so you don't have to do it twice. And yeah, it can be fully used. We support Sarbanes-Oxley, and we support COBITS. We have a complete ISO implementation. We've got Basel for the international. We have JSOX. We have all the major compliance frameworks. And for the larger organization, it's completely customizable, so you can add your own best practices and use it in any format that works for your organization.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Thank you to all our attendees, and of course to Jim for presenting. We'll have a recording of the webinar available on eGestalt's website at www.egestalt.com. Have a great day, and thanks again, Jim.
Thanks, Michael.